Because this is your first major assignment in the course, I wanted to take a few minutes to discuss how I grade essays. For every major paper or essay that you're assigned, I'll give you the guidelines, the rubric, and then codes. The guidelines are really important for you to spend time reading over because there will always be a task and purpose so you understand what type of assignment you're working with. I will describe the writing process. If there are research source requirements, I will outline those. There are always formal requirements about the documentation style to use, as well as a minimum length requirement. The minimum length requirement is really important to pay attention to. The reason that I have a minimum length requirement is that when I look at the paper and the number of sources that you're using, I know what length the paper needs to be in order to be developed enough. So the length requirement for the first paper, this one that we're looking at here, is 4 full pages. And not meeting this minimum length requirement does result in half credit on the paper. So if you want to receive full credit for your work, make sure that you meet that minimum length requirement. Please note that it does not include the works cited page if you're using MLA documentation or the reference page if you're using APA documentation. And if you're using APA, it also does not include the cover page. So it is 4 full pages of your writing for the essay. I also always provide a recommended length, and the recommended length is generally what the paper should be in order to be fully developed. So 5 to 7 pages is the recommended length, but the absolute minimum is 4 full pages. I will also provide a rough draft due date and final draft due date. If you're in a seat-based class, you bring your printed copies into class with you. However, if you're in an online class, then you will have a peer assessment writing workshop due date. So make sure that you pay attention to all the deadlines that you have. There's a reminder that the paper needs to be submitted on Blackboard by the deadline. And if you ever have any issues submitting a paper on Blackboard, go ahead and email your final draft to me by the deadline so that you can get full credit. Late papers are accepted. However, you will lose major points for submitting your paper late. So for 3 calendar days after the deadline, not class meetings, but calendar days, which is 72 hours, your paper will be accepted. Each day that it's late, 10 points or a full letter grade will be deducted from the final grade. And after those 72 hours pass, after the deadline, the assignment will be given an automatic 0. Issues with technology will not excuse late papers, so make sure you submit them on time in order to receive full credit. Okay, let's talk about the rubric. So this is how I will grade you. You have 2 categories on the rubric. You'll be graded on content, and you will also be graded on grammar. For content, you can get up to 70 points, and for grammar, you can get up to 30 points. What I do is I describe what an A paper looks like, what a B paper looks like, what a C paper looks like, what a D paper looks like, and what an F paper looks like. For each one of those categories, you can get a range of points. So for an A paper on content, you can get 63 to 70 points. B is 56 to 62 points. C is 49 to 55 points. And D is 42 to 48 points. If it's an F paper or far below average, that means that it's not meeting the requirements and it will be a 0. For the grammar rubric, what I do is I look for patterns of errors. Some patterns of errors can be present but don't interfere significantly with the reader's understanding. One example of this would be a comma splice. A comma splice is a mistake, it's a grammatical error. However, that's not going to interfere with my understanding of the writing as much as a sentence fragment or incomplete sentence was. So if I see a few minor errors that do not interfere with the reader's understanding of the writing, you can get 25 out of 30 points. If it contains a clear pattern of errors that does not significantly interfere, it's 20 points. If it contains a consistent pattern of errors that at times interferes with the reader's understanding, it's 15. If I see a consistent pattern that regularly interferes with my understanding of the writing, it's 10 points. And then when we get down to 5 points, that means that I'm seeing severe errors that make it very difficult for me to understand the writing. If there's an overwhelming number of grammatical errors, you will receive 0 points for grammar and I'll contact you. But I do look for those patterns, so I don't dock points for every single grammatical error that I see. Instead, I look for those overall patterns and I adjust the points accordingly. So you get your content grade out of 70, you get your grammar grade out of 30, which equals a total of potential 100 points. When it comes to looking at your feedback, I do use codes to leave feedback on the papers. The reason that I use codes is that a lot of times I see the same patterns over and over again across papers in an entire class. And so I've come up with these content codes and grammar codes so that it helps me get through the grading more quickly and so that you can look at these codes and see what needs to be fixed. So for example, if I see a title that could be a lot more interesting and relevant to the assignment, I'll put an A next to the title. If I see an introduction that needs to be developed, that needs more details, or it needs to be more engaging, I'll put a B. If I see a thesis statement that needs to be developed or revised because it might need to be more clear, then I'll put a C. So all of these content codes will be assigned with a letter. So if you see a letter in my feedback on your paper, you know that it is about content. If you see a grammar code, then you know that a grammatical error is present. So for example, if I highlight a word and put a 1 next to it, that means that that word is not spelled correctly. If I highlight a word and put a 5 next to it, that means that an apostrophe has not been used correctly. So when you see numbers, that means that a grammatical error is present. I have put some explanations here so that you can see what the error is and how to fix it. And I've also put section numbers and pages from a writer's reference so that you can refer to that section of the book and start correcting those grammatical errors that you see in your papers. I would like to assure you that if at any point you have questions about my feedback, if you're not sure why you got a certain comment, if you don't know why you got the grade that you got, I encourage you to email me or call me or stop by during my office hours. I would rather you ask questions and talk with me about your grades on your papers than be frustrated about something or not understand feedback that I've left. The purpose of my feedback is to leave feedback so that you can grow as a writer and that you can improve when you start writing your next paper. And so if there's feedback or any information that's not clear, I want to clarify that information for you before you start writing your next assignment.